This past Christmas, one of my sons told me that we don't get them anything after he didn't get one of the gifts that he really wanted. In this episode, you'll see how Rochelle and I responded and how you can raise kids who are not entitled.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is StewardShift, a show that gives you the tools you need to get the most of your best resources. Your money, your mind, your body, your time.
Welcome back to the StewardShift show. I'm your host, Troy Solomon Levy. I'm a bit tanned because I just came back from the sunny state of Florida, chaperoning my oldest son's 8th grade class trip. I can't believe that I'm about to have a high schooler. That makes me feel old, but that's neither here nor there. During the trip, they were having such a great time, and the kids were really, really good. But I was sharing with my oldest son how privileged he is because he got to take a class trip to Florida. I told him when I was in 8th grade, I did 8th grade in the city of Philadelphia, and my class trip wasn't near what his class trip was. Instead of going to Florida for a 4-day trip as he did, we did just a day trip to Six Flags in New Jersey. It was like 40 minutes away, and I'm not complaining about it at all. We had a blast for our class trip. We had a really, really fun time. But a 1-day trip to Six Flags is a lot different than a 4-day trip to Florida, doing the parks and those kinds of things. I know there are a lot of 8th graders who haven't done anything or don't really do a whole lot for their 8th grade trip, which is fine. But my point is that he got this great privilege of going somewhere for several days, a trip that did cost a good amount. And it was something that I just wasn't able to experience myself. And I'm really glad that he got to experience it, but I'm trying to help him to understand how privileged he is, not just compared to his dad, but how privileged he is compared to the rest of the world. My kids live a very, very privileged life. And if you're a parent out there and you're watching, your kids probably live a very privileged life compared to yours growing up, and of course, compared to people around the world. Well, I started off this episode just kind of cluing you in about something that happened this past Christmas season. And it's just kind of a tradition in my house, probably in your house also if you have children, that my wife and I, we get our kids a thing or two for Christmas. We don't, at least I don't think we spoil our kids. And of course, that definition of spoiled might be, kind of relative. But I don't think we really spoil our kids compared to how much we could do for them, right? So we get them a thing or two, and we have them kind of write out a list of the things that they might want for Christmas time. And we select a thing or two from that list, usually, to get them those things. And I told them this past year as they wrote their list out, I told one of my sons in particular, because, of course, my kids are getting older and they're getting into video games and sneakers and clothing, and they're just really wanting to get a lot. And I'm feeling like these Christmas lists are getting more and more expensive every single year. So one of my boys, they wrote down this list, and I told him that I wasn't getting him the number one thing on his list. It was just like crazy expensive, like a lot. And I can afford it. I can get it. But I told him, you're not getting that. So my son had the audacity to tell me, his dad, that we don't get them anything. I looked at this privileged kid and I told him, okay, I don't get you anything, right? Well, those words are going to come true. And I try to tell my kids, especially this particular kid, dude, the more you shut your mouth, the better life will be. Like, just close your mouth. You don't have to say any and everything that comes to mind. There's no harm thinking it, but be careful how your thoughts transform into words. And lo and behold, this particular son allowed his mouth to get himself into trouble yet again. Because if he never said anything, I would have been fine. If he had just let it simmer in his own mind, in his thoughts, he would have never let it come out. I would have never heard it, and I would have never told him what I told him. I told him, okay, I never get you anything, right? Like December 26th, starting on that day, don't expect not a pair of sneakers from me. Don't expect any clothing from me. Like, don't expect it at all. I don't get you anything, right? Well, we're going to make those words true. And I told him, dude, like pretty much for the rest of your life, I'm not buying you any of those things. Okay? Because the reality is, it's not that we don't get them anything. It's just that we don't get them every single thing that they ask for or every single thing that they want. We do our best not to spoil our kids. Do we get them name brand thing? Yes. Yes, we do. And I'll come back to that in just a second, because there's some things that I've kind of discovered about myself along the way as to why I do things a certain way or do things the way I do them. But that hadn't been his reality. We have bought our kids so many name brand things that we didn't have to get them. And I said, okay, starting December 26th, don't expect anything from me in terms of clothing except for underwear, except for uniform for school, and something decent to wear to church. Besides those three things, don't expect anything else from me in terms of clothing, because I don't get you nothing, right? So here we are. This is something that, and of course, I kind of wrote my wife in and she agreed with me. So this is where we are with our children. But I'm not the only one who has done something like this. Warren Buffett very famously has not included his children in his estate plan. And he said, look, my kids are very fine. They'll be more than okay. They each have their own foundations, and through their foundations, they'll be able to serve humanity in the way that they need to serve them. But beyond that, I'm not going to spoil my kids or give them a whole lot more than what they'll be able to handle. And he's, for better or for worse, he's famous for saying or having that approach for his own children. So here are three things that I'm going to share with you. I'm going to tell you how giving our children everything can damage them. And then I'm going to share with you why we as parents oftentimes are tempted to give our kids everything. And then I'm going to share with you towards the end what we can do to help raise them to be good stewards of what they have instead. All right, so first and foremost, how does giving our children everything damage them? Well, number one, they can grow up with fewer coping skills. When we give them everything, they now expect that everyone else will give them everything as well. When the reality is that the world doesn't work like that. And they're not able to put two and two together. And when we give them everything, they think that everyone else will give them everything. And they're not able to have the social and coping skills that are necessary when they grow up to be older to realize or to understand that, hey, this just isn't how life works. So that's number one. A second reason why giving our children everything can damage them is that it gives them a sense of entitlement. They think that everybody will give them everything. And you know, they just tend to be entitled or think that they don't have to work for the things that they have. And then the third reason is that it destroys their ability to accomplish something when you are no longer around as a parent. And here's the reality of life. And you know this, and I know this, that we won't be around for our whole lives or for the rest of their lives. Every parent ideally believes that their children will bury them and that we won't bury our children. Of course, not every situation works out perfectly like that. But if we live here on this earth long enough, we do understand that hopefully our children will bury us. At the very least, our children won't be around us for the rest of their lives. That's kind of the ideal. At some point, we want them to launch out, be on their own, not in the same household, many times not in the same city. And when you are not around, they have to be able to accomplish something on their own. They have to be able to navigate the world on their own without your help and without your say-so. And when you give them everything, they're not able to really navigate this world. And so all three of those reasons are very much related, but a bit separate in their own right. So that's how they can be damaged if we give them everything. Now, there's several reasons why we as parents are tempted to do this. And in a financial sense, you know, we kind of want to connect the dots. But a lot of this, it tends to be more psychological. We as parents raise our children to be, generally speaking, to be the people that they grow up to be. And here's some reasons why we're tempted to give our children everything. And by the way, this isn't just your temptation. I'm very much tempted to do this even to this day. So one reason why we are tempted to do this is because we don't want them to struggle like we've had to struggle. And many times when we say the word struggle, when we hear the word struggle, there's this kind of negative thing about struggling. And yes, some things about struggling are negative, but not everything about struggling is a negative thing. We've all probably seen or heard the stories of the bird that has its egg open for it, and it's not able to do much in life because opening the egg as it was being birthed was something that helped them to be able to develop the strength that they needed to carry on in their lives. And so that's just one negative thing that happens when we just stop the struggle from our kids. Another reason why we do this is that we want them to have the life that we never had. And of course, I just explained in our introduction that my son has this 4-day trip to Florida where he's going to all of these parks and whatnot. He has a great time. And that's a life that I just never had. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I love the fact that he had this experience, but it is, in fact, a life that I never lived. And we all want that, generally speaking, for our children. We want them to have things and have experiences that we never had. And I want to say that that's not a negative thing. That's actually a very positive thing. It just depends on how we allow our kids to have those experiences as to whether or not that'll be positive or negative. Another reason why we do this for our children is that we want them to fit in. All right, now this is big for me, and I'll explain a little bit more in just a second. But we don't want our children to be made fun of. We don't want them to, we want them to kind of be in the cool kids group or that whole crew. We don't want them to be made fun of or to be bullied or anything like that. So that is a major reason why a lot of parents do a lot for their kids so that they can fit in with everyone else. Another reason is that we want them to have high self-esteem. Now, I'm not going to really dwell too much here, but I do have some feelings about the whole self-esteem movement and whatnot that are probably a bit anti-culture and against the grain, but I'm not going to bother that here and now. Second to last reason is that it's a lot easier to give in, right? When when our children ask us for something, it's just a lot harder to say no and a lot easier to say yes. When we say no to our children, sometimes they get a bit downcast. They feel some sort of way. Sometimes our children get angry with us, which doesn't really bother me much, but it does bother some of our parents out there in the audience. Or maybe some of our kids stop talking to us for a time in the season. It's just a lot easier to give in and say yes than to say no. Now, this last reason why we tend to give them everything, has a lot less to do with them and has a lot more to do with ourselves. And it's that we don't want anyone to think that we can't afford to do certain things for our children. So for instance, growing up, every now and then I was made fun of for not having the latest stuff, like especially clothes and that kind of thing, the sneakers, the clothing. And I know for me, I didn't want my kids to have to deal with that. And this has something to do with fitting in, right? I told you we were coming back to that. But, I just don't want them to be made fun of like I was made fun of for not having all the right things, for not having the name brand things and the cool things. And to some extent, along the way, as I've reflected on my parenting, there have been times when I've gotten my kids things, name brand things, maybe a bit more expensive than the everyday generic things, because I thought that this would kind of launch them into a certain crew or not allow them, at the very least, not allow them to be made fun of by those who make fun of people. It hasn't dominated my style of parenting at all, but I am going to be honest enough to say that it has impacted or has a small hand, at the very least, in how I've dealt with my kids in a financial sense. So let's put a little bit of scripture on this. This was Jesus who said this in Luke chapter 12 and verse 15. He said, "Take care, protect yourself against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot." And I think that this is a very important lesson that our children have to learn. And by the way, that most parents have to learn first, that we need to pass on to our children, that our lives are not defined by what we have. The material things of life does not dictate to us as to who we are, how valuable we are. Those things have nothing to do with the value of our humanity. We are great. We are loved. We are who we are because God created us so. Not because we've bought certain things for ourselves, not because we've had certain experiences that other people have not had. That's not who we are. And we have to be very, very careful to not define our lives by what we have or what we don't have. Okay, so all of those things aside, that's why we do the certain things. That's how our kids can be damaged by giving them everything. So here's my suggestion as to what we can do instead. Number one, it's a psychological thing. It's a mindset thing. And we would do very, very well, financially speaking, to help our kids understand why they do what they do. For instance, why do we buy certain things? Why do we want certain things? And it's not that buying certain things or even wanting certain things is bad in and of themselves, even expensive things that are a bit pricey. That's not necessarily a negative thing to purchase pricey things. However, the motivation behind buying things, behind spending, that's something that has to be dealt with. Otherwise, and I share this with my sons all the time, that if we're buying things in order to be seen, in order to be liked, in order to, with this certain motivation to impress people, that we're going to be doing that for the rest of our lives unless we check it early. So there's certain things that my sons want that they say, I want this because everybody else has it. And I tell them, hey, it's okay to want something. It's even okay to buy it, but it's not okay to buy it or want it because everybody else has it. That in and of itself is not okay. So something that I ask them is, do you spend money because you like something, or do you spend money because you want to be liked? I'm going to say that one more time. We got to ask our kids, do they spend money because they like it, or do they spend it because they want to be liked? And that's a very important question. That's a mindset question. That's a motivation question that has to be asked of every single person. And by the way, parents, I'm going to say this again. If you haven't answered that question with a good amount of satisfaction yourself, then it's going to be hard for you to lead your children to make the right decisions when they spend money and to have the right motivation. So that's something that we have to ask, and that's a mindset thing. The second thing, and I have three things as to what we can do instead. The second thing is to expose them to people who have problems a lot more difficult than their own. So one thing that I spoke with my wife about, spoke with Rochelle about after that whole Christmas incident, I said, babe, something in the new year has to change. And we decided together that in the new year that we would make some soup for those who are less fortunate, those who are displaced, those who are homeless. And we would go downtown and go to where those who are displaced are. And we would have our children give them the soup and the sandwiches. In fact, at some points when our kids came home from school, they themselves assembled the sandwiches, and my wife made the soup, and we put them in to-go containers and whatnot in some sandwich bags. And we hand delivered that, like we had our children hand deliver these items to those who are displaced so that they can understand that there are people who are a lot worse off than they are, so that they know that the problems that they have really aren't huge problems in the grand scheme of things. And we understand that the more they focus on their own problems, the more entitled they'll probably become. And the more they focus on helping other people relieve their problems, that the less focused on their own so-called problems they will be, and the less entitled they'll be. And so that's been one of our goals, to help our kids focus financially less on their own stuff and put a focus on other people and their financial problems, so that they can be more appreciative of what they have. That's the second thing. The very last thing that I'm suggesting that you do to help you raise children who are not entitled is to have them work for at least some of what's given to them. So in my own household, my children do not get an allowance like completely for free. They earn their allowance. So each of my children have a job that they're to complete every single day and certain jobs that they're to complete every single week. And these are things that help the household. And I know that some people have mixed feelings about doing these kinds of things. Some people say, oh, well, you live here, so you need to contribute to the household. And I completely agree with that approach. It's just that this approach for us has worked, at least up until this point, for our children, where they do certain chores around the home and outside the home that they do get paid for. And we feel as if that this helps to encourage a spirit of working hard. And I dock their pay if they don't do those chores well, or if they just don't do it altogether. I do dock their pay so they don't get paid, if they don't do it or not, or something like that. So yeah, these are things that we do for our own children. I'm really hoping that my oldest son, as he gets into his high school years, that he'll be able to start working, working, not just working in the household, but actually working for some money. And I believe that it's our job as parents to, what I call, simulate the hustle that we had to get where we are today. So yes, of course, most of our children aren't going to be growing up in the same situations and circumstances that we ourselves as parents grew up in. But at the very least, we can help them to simulate the hustle, help them to work hard so that they can have or grow up with the same spirit of working that we had to get to where we are today. So sometimes that requires kind of being a bit tough with them, having some tough love. But I think for my own household that tough love has worked so far. Have they have moments of entitlement? Absolutely. Just like, case in point, this past Christmas time. But by and large, I think that simulating the hustle for our children and helping them to understand that other people's problems are a lot worse than their own problems has helped them to be more appreciative in the long run for what they have. If you need some help parenting or raising some money smart kids in the financial sense, see a video that we created with Courtney Hale as I interviewed him about his own methods of raising money smart kids. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has been StewardShift, and we'll catch you next time.